us off. I know.
I can't believe it's already April 20th. Yeah, it's really nuts. Well, hello, everybody. We've got everyone here now, so welcome to our work session for April 20th. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Thompson, Woodings,
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. So first up, and I won't say much with Eric jumping in on budget. I'll talk a little bit more later on through the agenda, but first up, welcome, Eric. Good to see you in person. And we've got Eric here to share a budget development update with the council and then take feedback for next steps.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I have a update as we are building our fiscal year 22 budget for you. As we go through this, I have just a few objectives. First is just to provide an overall update on some of the conditions and assumptions that we are considering in the development of this budget. Talk about some of the themes as we are developing recommendations for your consideration. Obviously, to solicit feedback and then to outline next steps. So first, I'll just hit on some of the conditions and assumptions. And I'll start with fiscal year 21, kind of how things are performing now. We'll move into fiscal year 22 in a moment. The fiscal year 21 budget was developed really kind of at the pinnacle of uncertainty around COVID. You think about last spring. So the revenue assumptions that were built into the budget were quite conservative and assumed steeper revenue drops than we have experienced. At the same time, we expect fiscal year 21 budgets on the expenditure side to have some level of savings due to numerous factors, and I'll just keep this at a high level. Some of those factors include slowed and reduced hiring. We have needed to lean on our contingencies less than we had previously assumed or anticipated. And then we've, seen facility closures. Now, some of those facility closures have come with offsetting revenue reductions, but there have been reduced costs as well. So with all of that, we anticipate that there's going to be some one-time funding available at the conclusion of this fiscal year that we can repurpose to other needs. And as we look forward to fiscal year 22, I did provide an update to the City Council during the month of February. The conditions on the revenue side are largely unchanged from that point in time. We are predicting to see recovery in our revenues as compared to the current fiscal year as well as fiscal year 20. Primarily in a handful of our revenue categories. Within our development fees, that's one of the categories that we had built in reductions as part of the fiscal year 21 budget, and we've seen better than anticipated performance. I'll note with that one that we do have a direct relationship to expenditures, so there are expenditure offsets associated with development fees. Some of our parks and recreation fees, we are anticipating improved level. Sales tax, and sales tax is a little bit of a unique one. We expect about 1% growth from last year due to some statewide legislation that was approved in January of 2020, albeit the amount that we had built into fiscal year 20 was lower than I think we'll experience this year. So we will see more than 1% growth on a year-over-year basis. And then parking is another area where we expect to see some improvement. As we look at our fiscal year 22 kind of base expenditures, we are seeing, year-over-year cost increases and assuming some level of cost increases. One reason for that is just kind of, a projected return to having our facilities open and offering more of the programs to the community. And then, some of the normal cost of doing business, salary and benefit increases, various increases in some of our non-personnel items. Fuel is one that we all experience every day. We're seeing the fuel costs go up, software maintenance and insurance being a couple other examples. So with that as kind of a backdrop, I'll now start to get into some of the themes that we're considering as we build the fiscal year 22 budget. And again, I'd welcome feedback throughout this. So one of the first things is we anticipate having some one-time funding available from a handful of different sources. I touched just a couple minutes ago on the fiscal year 21 projected surplus due to revenue improvement and expenditure savings. We also have the American Rescue Plan, the recently approved plan. And as we look at that, we are still waiting for firm guidance on how those funds can be used, but we do know that revenue replacement should be an allowable expense. Infrastructure projects, sewer, water, broadband are some of the ones that were called out initially, and then various community uses. And then the other thing we're looking at is taking funds that were accumulated over time for the main library project and putting those to more immediate use for the community. So as we look at those three categories, we do anticipate having some one-time funds to work with. As we look to craft recommendations, we'll be looking at investing in some of the key community needs and strategic priorities, those including housing and homelessness, economic development, climate innovation, transportation, accessibility, and public safety. And these are themes that we saw as part of the fiscal year 21 budget as well. Another thing that we are looking at is using some of that one-time funding to create future flexibility. So an example of that could be taking a chunk of that funding and paying down debt, and thereby relieving us of the debt service obligations that we have in future years, and being able to put that funding into other community needs. As we look to develop recommendations, we're looking at opportunities to address service deficiencies and respond to growth. So some of the areas that we're looking at are public safety, support department staffing. So as you look at, those strategic initiatives that we looked at on the previous slide, we know that it requires legal support and technology support and financial support, and ensuring that, the departments that support those initiatives are appropriately staffed. Another example would be parks maintenance staffing. As we look at, Bowler Park or other parks that are coming online, we need to ensure that we have the resources to adequately maintain those assets. We're looking at capital project cost escalation. So the labor market is quite intense, and we're seeing cost escalation on the materials as well. So our previous estimates that we had for certain projects need to be adjusted. Examples of that could include, some of our larger fire projects. We have got a couple of stations that are, projected to come on in the next couple of years. technology projects, as well as some of our perks projects. One of the things that we are contemplating is accelerating the build out of some of our of the replacement of some of our support facilities. So I think a few weeks ago, Rob Bosefield gave an update on parks maintenance facilities and fire logistics, which have been part of our capital plan. To the degree that there is a possibility to accelerate the replacement of those facilities, we may be able to repurpose that land that they currently exist on and use that towards housing needs. We're looking at major repairs and maintenance, and that's been a theme over the last couple budget cycles. The City Council approved funding as part of the fiscal year 20 end of year process to help catch up on some of the backlog. But as we look into the future, we're looking at opportunities to have a more sustainable amount allocated. More appropriate amount is probably a better choice of word, to ensure that we're adequately maintaining our current assets and that we are preparing for future growth. And one of the things we want to do is, ensure that we do maintain flexibility to respond to future year growth. So not all of the growth items are going to come this year. So an example would be, fire station staffing in the Northwest. That station isn't constructed, but we want to ensure that we maintain flexibility to be able to open that station as planned. We also want to, maintain flexibility to respond to unanticipated items in the future by maintaining our cash flow reserve and addressing our major repairs. So as we, proceed down the path of developing the fiscal year 22 budget, probably the next point that you'll see us would be on May 11th. We have a half-day workshop scheduled. At that workshop, we intend to, have some of these recommendations a little more developed for your consideration and feedback, as well as have an opportunity for some of the departments to present directly to the City Council, talking about some of the opportunities, challenges, and themes as we look into the fiscal year 22 budget build. We anticipate having the budget document released June 11th and having our annual budget workshop on the entirety of it June 22nd. July 20th, we'll have our public hearing where any members of the public can come and provide their testimony on the budget itself, as well as on our fees and charges. And then in the month of August, we'll have our readings of the budget and budget adoption. So that's largely it. It's kind of the update. I'd be very happy to stand for any questions or feedback as we march down towards the May 11th update and the eventual publication of the budget.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Eric. It's nice to have a map of where we're going to be going over the next several months. My question is around broadband. It's my understanding that part of the federal monies we'll be receiving will be for the expansion of broadband. Can you give us an idea of where planning for that is right now and what we might be able to anticipate in the budget for that?
Sure, Council Member, I'll jump in here. That is indeed one of the things that we hope that we can fund with the American Rescue Plan dollars coming. For the last year, the IT staff, economic development staff have looked at mapping out what it was we needed as a city to be able to provide broadband around the entire city. We have a sense of what that is. And just today, actually, the director of our IT department, Erica, was meeting with a team of consultants and others in her office to drill down even deeper so we can come up with specific actions that could be taken with ARP funds to expand broadband within our community. And to that end, she's also met with agencies, both the county and the highway district, to have a conversation also about our hope and intent to partner, our desire to partner to expand access to broadband throughout our city. And so there should be more, and her intent is to be able to provide more specifics and recommendations that align with the timing of the receipt of funds, as well as the guidance on how we can spend those funds.
Great, thank you. I look forward to kind of seeing some options and seeing how much we can do with that money and potentially other money that we've had for broadband in years past. So thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Eric, thank you for the presentation. I know last year we were pretty ambitious with the amount of public outreach we were planning on doing. And then, COVID kind of turned our world upside down. We still ended up having a ton of people reach out to us about the budget. I know that this year we have challenges as well with the late legislative session, COVID continuing to be challenging. I'm wondering if we have any plans as far as community outreach goes, as far as the budget process.
Thank you very much, Council Member. We are, certainly working through various options. One of the things we'd like to do is, develop our recommendations, around the timing of that first budget workshop to allow time for, dialogue with the community around those recommendations. You did touch on some of the challenges that we're faced with. Last year, in the absence of being able to get out there and talk to people in the way that we otherwise would have liked, we worked really hard to, improve our website and make sure that there was, a good way to share information. We were continuing to work through, improvements in that regard. One of the things we did was our open budget platform, which is, kind of really opens up the whole budget to everybody. But I guess in answer to your question, we're still kind of looking through ways to do that.
And then, Madam Mayor, just to follow up, in my head, I love the idea that the public would really want to weigh in on the budget, and maybe they don't find it quite as fascinating as maybe I might. But to Council Member Wooding's point, I think when it comes to some of these one-time funding that we might be getting available in different buckets that we could be investing into, I think it was really exciting to know what some of those things are. So whether there's public outreach through CE or through ourselves and trying to gather input, knowing what some of those buckets might be in some of those areas, so that we can be, as council members trying to get feedback as well. Anything we can do, I'd certainly be interested in. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate the presentation and look forward to seeing some of the details on this. I'm especially excited about some of the things that we can do to move things forward on both the parks facilities and the logistics facilities so that we can continue to work on our housing issues. Also look forward to having discussions early on with the council about the ARP money so that we can get at least at a high level, make sure staff feels empowered to go ahead and begin planning some of these things, even though we don't know exactly what the details will be. And then finally, really look forward to the discussion around the money that we had set aside for the library and how we might be able to use it effectively now while we still plan for a library at some point in the future. So I assume those will be, they won't be part of the May 11th. Will those discussions be part of June 11th? Is that what we're thinking at this point?
Thank you very much for the question, Council Member. Most certainly for the June 11th and as part of the budget document, to the degree allowable, also at the May 11th session.
Yes,
And-
Council President, after our leadership meeting, when you asked about that, I talked with Chief of Staff and I think Eric as well about saying if we can do that sooner rather than later, knowing that we don't have the guidance yet. But yes, there would be a presentation on what likely would cover, and then we could start to have that conversation that
Super.
would build in for the budget
For
document.
the budget build. Okay. Yeah, that part of it as soon as possible would be great. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Last question. We don't have the budget certification date on here. It's always good to put it on the calendar just so we know what the drop dead date is if we need to. And ensure that we have a day to review the L2. Especially this year, my guess is the L2 is going to be kind of complicated given the rebate.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was an oversight on my part. We will certainly bring that in future updates. The L2 is due to the county for us to certify our property tax right around the 7th or 8th of September. But we'll put that on going forward.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much.
So next up, looks like first we're going to have Chief Lee, and then we'll have Chief Niemeyer to discuss the police level of service and then fire level of service. I just wanted to tee this up and remind folks that as a community, we are deeply committed to community policing. And so as the chief today discusses level of service, the impacts of growth, please be mindful that it's not all immediate, but that we are looking at what we will likely expect to be able to continue to provide community policing in its true form as our city continues to grow. And I just say that particularly in light of the conversations we've had in the last year in the actions that have occurred in communities other than ours, thank goodness. And then just acknowledging the verdict that came out today, we have seen how important community-focused policing, relational policing is if we want to ensure that we don't see incidents in our own community like we've seen in other communities that don't have community policing. And so to that end, I asked Chief Lee to work to acknowledge the growth that our community has and will experience. And then the importance and value that this council has always placed on community policing versus traditional policing, and then to share with us, how we can be sure to provide the level of service within that community policing model that residents of Boise expect, and that I think that we all want to see. And I keep saying it, but from the community policing perspective, rather than traditional policing that we've seen in so many other places. And with that, Chief, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Somebody's going to share it.
It's
Oh,
up there.
look at that magic. Today, I'm going to talk about my vision for community policing in Boise. I'm going to go through some of our current deficiencies and talk about future opportunities to meet the challenges ahead. Our community has extremely high expectations of the police, and they should. Officers are in a position of authority, and the standards for their conduct, both on and off duty, must be high. On top of that, our community expects the department to do proactive police work, conduct quality investigations, be capable of providing proper supervision to their line officers, have best-in-class training and education, build strong community partnerships, and offer the highest level of customer service. The requirements to run a police department are often not fully appreciated by the public at large. And in order to illustrate the challenges the police department is experiencing, I'm going to use an analogy to the hospital healthcare system. I think many of us have interfaced with the healthcare system more than the police system. And so hopefully this will help draw some parallels for you. Again, it's just an analogy, but I think it will help to illustrate the kind of depth the department should have to really be effective. The Boise Police Department has grown from being a town doctor to offering a variety of specialty services, but in order to continue to grow, we need to expand into a model that resembles a healthcare system. At present, we have shifted resources to address our emergency room needs, but have under-resourced our follow-up and specialist services. We need to increase our outreach efforts that focus on prevention. We can't wait for problems to reach the emergency room. We all know hospitals work to avoid having patients end up in the emergency room. Not only is it expensive, but it also often doesn't have the specialists on site that are needed or to address the root causes of problems. We also need to increase our level of specialty positions. We need dedicated liaison officers and other specialists like the services coordination team that I spoke of before. Right now, we have a majority of the people in the department wearing a lot of hats to do those jobs, and it hampers their ability to be effective and make a difference in any one particular area. We need to develop additional partnerships with the community, in order to build trust that is out there and to continue to foster the trust as the city grows. We need to support our internal departments doing research and training, including crime analysis, the crime lab, the training staff, and those who are working to constantly update the policies based on best practices. You can imagine all the people behind the scenes at the hospital who help to keep the place running smoothly and to do the background work to help support the decisions that need to be made. We need to do all of this without overworking our staff so that they're able to offer amazing customer service on every contact and in the end, offer a better quality of life to our community. That is what we expect of a hospital system. Every time we see a doctor, we expect them to help us in the end to make us feel better. And the public should expect no less from their police service. Unfortunately, our future trend lines don't meet that expectation. This chart shows that since 2010, our number of officer-initiated contacts, proactive police work, has gone down drastically, and our public-initiated contacts, calls for service, have gone up. That means officers are responding to more emergency room type calls than making preventive contacts. The preventive contacts are at the heart of community policing and essential to building trust and legitimacy. Also, we know that the people who call the police are often not the people who are most in need of police services. The people who miss out on police services with an emergency room only response model are often the most vulnerable populations: children, marginalized populations, refugees. And this will continue to result in those people having a lower level of trust in the police in general because we have never reached out to them to build those relationships prior to when they need that emergency service. I don't want to create a fear of crime with this presentation, but I do want to point out a few quick facts to show the impacts of growth here in Boise on our police services. We are not seeing an overall rise in crime, but we are seeing shifts in the types of crimes that are occurring, and based on my experiences, we are seeing an increase in a need for police services related to population growth. For example, we're seeing a rise in fraud crimes, the 2010 and 2019 being the best pre-COVID year to use as an example of the rise in fraud crimes. Sexual assault reports and assaults on police officers. We're also seeing an increase in overtime costs reflected in the column on the right, which we're using to make up for that deficit in dedicated straight time police services that we can provide. Here's a look at how many officers we have to do investigations in the staff some of our specialty positions. There are 6 officers who investigate all the violent crime year-round in the city. If there is one major event, they may be all out on that event, and everything else they are working on has to be put on hold. There is 1 sergeant overseeing the property and financial crimes in the city. We are not able to investigate all property crimes and must prioritize investigations based on resources. Although property crimes are at the top of our calls for services, many property crimes don't receive extensive or further investigation other than the initial patrol contact. We have 11 designated areas of the city that we cover with only 9 neighborhood contact officers. And because of injuries that occur in our profession, we currently only have 6. So some of those officers are assigned to work more than one area. These are the officers who handle the long-term problems, the neighborhood issues that are at the heart of building community trust and coordinating the efforts of patrol. Traffic also remains a top concern for our community, and we can't meet all of the requests and resources with the current resources that we have. And we are again having to triage based off of primary areas of concern. For years, we've been working to make sure that the patrol was fully staffed, and now as the city grows, the unmet needs in other areas require further attention. This is an example of one of the recognized deficiencies we have in our department and where it will continue to compound as growth continues in the city. Looking ahead at some of the challenges that will come with more city growth, realistically, you must recognize that more people will lead to more interactions and sadly, more conflict. I've seen it, it's a recognized statistic, and I recognize if we don't invest in community policing ahead of time, where this will lead to. With more industry opportunities in Boise, there will be new opportunities and new types of crimes that we'll need to investigate. We'll have to find ways to stay ahead of that curve. As we respond to more calls for service, we'll be less proactive with fewer non-enforcement police contacts, and that unequivocally results in a loss of trust in the police. A loss of police trust has negative results on the quality of life, feeling of safety, and other economic drivers for our city. In order to impact some of our current deficiencies, we could use an additional 35 sworn officers and additional professional staff behind the scenes to help support areas of supervision, help drive down overtime costs, manage the criminal investigations, address the rise in high-tech crime, meet the training and education needs that we need for a major city police department, and address deficiencies in the neighborhood contact officers, liaison, and community connections. In order to not see compounding problems in the future and a continued gap in our ability to reach out to marginalized populations and provide those specialized services, I envision a plan that would require adding 100 officers over the next decade over our current staffing level. That would help us meet the expected growth in the areas of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and violent crime related to both of those. It will also help us maintain trust and legitimacy, as well as to continue to resolve crimes with the least amount of force. More officers on calls reduces the need for officers to have to use higher levels of force. It also helps us to have officers who are not overworked and who can offer the type of customer service that the community expects and make the best decisions possible in sometimes very difficult situations. I've been a part of a community that didn't prepare well for growth, and I've studied the impact too few officers have on some of the bigger cities in our country. My vision for Boise is to have a department that is capable and set up to offer emergency response, quality wraparound services, and specialized response, and we have to grow the department accordingly. With that, Council, I would open the floor to your questions.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief. I'm curious about the high-tech crimes. Is there a possibility that we've got folks who, I don't know the right term to use. I just turned 50, so I'm very sensitive to the right term. So elderly population, seniors who might be isolated and who might fall prey to scams, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, what that breaks down to look like.
Well, there's definitely an increase in that type of crime as we become a more technologically dependent society. We're seeing that as a general shift in policing. Our current model for the department requires us to leverage relationships with other partners. So we're in a regional computer forensic lab model now to be able to investigate and do forensic analysis of computers for many of the high-tech crimes. The problem with it being a regional response with federal partners is they may deem our project not a priority, where I would think the victim in our community would probably feel very differently. We need to be able to have internal resources to address some of those challenges. And again, they often impact the most vulnerable populations, those unfamiliar with our economic systems, subject to email and text messaging scams and a myriad of different things. We're also seeing a rise in technology being used to leverage other types of crimes, organizing malicious and violent intent in our communities, whether that is from what we would think of as traditional organized crime or gang activity to even some of the more alarming things that we've seen play out in our nation over the last year.
Thank you, Chief.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chief. I had a couple of questions. The first is with respect to this trend towards calls for service and I guess what you could call reactive or responsive policing. Is it presently, or do you project in the future that will have an effect on the ability to keep our officers trained? Because it's obviously consuming time, and I just wonder about the ability of training and maintaining the standards of our police department, if that could be affected as well.
To be frank with you, council member, I think it's already impacted our ability to train. So we're struggling to be able to meet training needs to meet minimum state qualifications, just to find the hours to be able to do that effectively. When we start to talk about training and education to address more complex issues, to adhere to best practices, to really start to educate on issues such as civil and human rights, the need to understand implicit bias, the time that we need to consume to educate in that area, we are struggling to be able to allot it without driving up high amounts of overtime. If we want officers to be rested, engaged, fully digesting, whether it's technical skills training or complex education, we're going to require more officers.
Thanks. I guess I would observe that from my perspective, one of the worst things to do would be to use training time to disguise some of our shortcomings. In other words, to staff our streets with untrained officers, because that's what we have to do to meet the requirements of our community. So I'll be interested in hearing as we go forward, whatever support you need to make sure that our people, in addition to being present and able to engage in community policing, are really adequately trained for it. A follow-up, if I can, Madam Mayor, was to ask if political issues in the last couple of years are affecting or could affect the ability to recruit these potential 100 officers in the next 10 years. We don't want 100 warm bodies. We want 100 of the best, most capable, most committed public servants that we can find. And so I wonder if you see that as being an issue, and if there's anything that we can do as city leadership to support you or help you in making sure that you're recruiting from the best talent pool available.
It's really, council members, sort of a two-tier challenge in there. We're seeing lateral officers from other communities making decisions to come here to Boise for all of the right reasons. We're able to vet some very high quality experienced officers that are able to bring talent to our community. However, when we look at new to the profession of policing, the national narrative has had an impact on that. I will use as an example, we posted for new hire officers. Longer ago than I want to admit, when I joined the profession, I remember 4,000 people showing up at the Oregon Convention Center to take the test on the same day that I did. When we posted for 2 weeks here, we had 89 people sign up, 38 actually bothered to take the test. If I look at standard attrition on the ability to actually pass fully through a background, pass medical screening, psychological screening, we'll be lucky if that yields us somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 officers. So I think part of the challenge, anything that the council can do to help us connect with communities, to help develop and message that the brand of policing is different in Boise. We are committed to community policing, to connecting with the community, delivering community-oriented services would be immensely beneficial in drawing in those new to the profession individuals.
Thank you, Chief.
And Mary? Thank you, Chief. A couple questions. One is about the need for an increase in specialty and liaison officers. And I just want to start out by saying that I've been on monthly calls with Officer Nar with our COVID vaccine task force with the refugee population. She's beloved by our refugee population. I'm interested to know what sort of specialty and liaison officer type positions you think that we're still needing.
I think the better way to probably illustrate it would be to take a specialty officer who does liaison work. So Ed Moreno is our Hispanic, Latina liaison officer. Ed is also the downtown neighborhood contact officer. He is also the primary point of contact for City Hall. He also is responsible for doing recruitment to the Hispanic population. He also regularly, as part of those efforts, is expected to speak on behalf of the police department to Spanish language radio shows. And so when you see a single officer wearing that many hats, my concern is he able to effectively engage all of those different dimensions? I think as we look at the population and it grows, the demographics change and we see new sub-communities emerging in the greater community of Boise, we need to be positioned to be able to dedicate a resource to make that connection.
Thank you, Chief. And just a couple of follow-ups. In my experience in Boise, those liaison officers have been incredibly effective and have been worth the investment. My other question kind of goes back to one of the slides where it talks a little bit about the overtime hours in 2020, and it kind of also references Councilmember Bajan's question about the political climate. I'm wondering if the protests we're seeing, the increased amount of protest, if that's having a direct effect on the amount of those overtime hours, those unexpected things that are causing a need for more officers during times when they may not be there, and if that's part of the reason, and if we see that as the size of Boise increasing, the need to be able to plan for that more often.
No, I think undoubtedly in this year that has impacted some of the overtime costs. The sad reality is I talked to my colleagues from the Major City Chiefs Association. That is part of a large city that you see unexpected events that are of a large scale for a variety of different reasons that are incredibly resource intensive to maintain public order and safety. I don't think that as Boise grows and as the Treasure Valley grows, and this is seen as the seat, that we'll see that diminishing. I think that that's going to be a continued demand for service. We can staff those with straight time officers, which is much more effective. They're much more well rested. They're much more capable, or specialized officers trained to deal with large public events. But the reality is that it's still very resource intensive.
And then Madam Mayor, just one final question. Also, I think kind of related to one of the questions Councilmember Bajent asked is just the recruitment and how challenging that is. And if that is anywhere tied to housing shortages that we have in Boise, the rising cost of living, if we're on pace with recruiting new people, because I know that if I'm moving laterally from another city, I probably have some sort of wealth that I'm moving with as well versus a new person who's maybe getting into the profession. I'm wondering if this is really something I'm able to do. And I guess I'm just curious if we know if the rising cost of living, the housing shortage in Boise has any effect on that ability to recruit new people as well.
It is having impact, council member, and it's actually the inverse. Many of the new people entering the profession are, there are local young professionals entering in. We're actually seeing it play out with people who are either further out from the city or lateral officers. I'll use as a case, we were very successful in recruiting the only known Bosnian Muslim war refugee police officer in the United States. He was very interested in coming and serving in the community of Boise. And in the time it took him to get through background and be offered a job, the housing market prices had increased so much that he had to decline the offer. He said, I can't afford to move my family to have a quality of life here. And this would have been a prime person as one of these liaison officers. This is somebody who's truly embedded in the community. We would have loved to have had him. No ability to convince him to come here because of the housing cost.
Thank you for your presentation, Chief.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, wait, no, sorry. Councilmember Halliburton was saying thank you, but there are some more questions.
Oh,
Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So a couple of questions, Chief. Thanks for being here. I just want to get some numbers right that you showed us. You showed us that we still only have one behavioral health unit. When will the other one be up and operational? And what about the community services behind it?
the behavioral health response team, we've identified officers that are interested in it. The challenge is actually finding a clinician to onboard. So being very frank with council, we went through a round of interviews with clinicians that applied. None of them seemed to be the best fit to fully grasp the types of services we need to deliver. We're back in the recruitment phase for that position. As soon as we can onboard somebody, we can put that team out with the appropriate training. With services coordination, again, we've built the networks. We'll need to find a services coordinator. We have officers that are interested in working in that space as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So you talked about needing another 100 officers in the next decade. We're about halfway into the 35, if my memory is correct. So what you're suggesting is that over the next decade, we need 120 total new officers, somewhere in that range. Or does the 100 include what's left of the 35?
The 100 would include what's left of the 35.
Okay.
The
right.
challenge with a 35 model, Madam President, is that it was really based off of patrol allocation. So using that analogy again, it was all focused on the emergency room doctors, and it didn't think of once you increase the intake, what do you need in the backside to do the follow-up services? And that was sort of the short side of that particular staffing model study.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was correct on that. So two questions about ways going forward. You talked about industrial growth potentially bringing with it a new kind of crime, and we do have a lot of industrial growth. If my memory serves me correctly, we have traditionally charged industrial users a lower impact fee rate, and I wonder if it's worth reviewing that, just, you know, as a matter of course, to make sure that we're on the right track on that.
In my opinion, it's always worth reviewing who is utilizing the services and how to sort of appropriately reach out, make sure people are paying their fair share. And so I think that especially when we see growth in tech sector and tech type crimes, it's worth you all taking a look at that.
Okay, so maybe we should review that. And then I know, there's been a lot in the news recently about changing the way we do traffic enforcement. I just wondered if any of those discussions had started yet, either nationally among the police chiefs or at the state level.
So I know that there have been multiple national discussions about traffic enforcement, the examination of what we should be doing enforcement for, and whether or not, frankly, we should be engaging in pretext stops as clearly as we are. I think that that's a discussion that requires a lot greater depth to understand sort of the nuances of it. I have not had the opportunity because of the tempo since that has been driven up in the national narrative to really sit down with the other executives here in the Treasure Valley and with leadership from Idaho State Police to talk about what are those particular impacts localized to us.
Okay. Well, this is a great beginning conversation, and I just wanted you to know those are the things that I'm thinking about as we go forward.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor, I just had one quick follow-up.
Sure.
The,
Anybody- you have something? No? Okay, I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody. Go ahead.
the 100 officers, those are sworn officers, or those a combination of sworn officers and civilians working for the police department?
It would likely be 100 sworn officers. I think that there always needs to be an examination as we grow out as a city and as a police department, recognizing what's the most efficient use. So some of those FTE could be actualized in professional staff instead of sworn membership. But I think that that's, setting a bar so that we have a reasonable expectation of where we need to grow to. That's a nice round number for people, I think, to actualize on.
Sure. And just to follow up, Madam Mayor, should that also mean that we would expect that 100 sworn officers with the possibility of additional professional staff as well in the next 10 years?
I think that 100 additional FTE would probably capture it. The general challenge that we see, most police departments, about a third to a quarter of whatever your sworn membership is represented in professional staff to meet those service demands. I think as we look at how we build out the department, there's always room to examine what's the most effective utilization of FTE.
Perfect. Thank you.
We've got time only for one more and then we need more. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, in regards to how we get those 100 folks that we need to join BPD. 3 years ago, Councilmember Woodings and I took part in Fire Ops 101 with BFD, and I have to admit, I had no idea that women were firefighters. It was my first experience meeting women firefighters, and I was greatly moved by that and very impressed. And so we put a training on for teenage Girl Scouts and BFD, and in fact, one of our participants just got accepted to the CWI Fire Training Services program. I'm wondering if there's something similar, if there isn't something similar with BPD, if it's something that we could consider looking at about growing our own.
We have had citizens academies for the community. I know that they've looked at, and in my previous stop, we had a model that was designed particularly to reach out to youth with this idea of growing it over a decade, that those people would wind up in the workforce. I think it's absolutely an appropriate way to target and outreach in any way to especially reach out into communities that are underrepresented in our department. I would defer to the wisdom and guidance of council and any ideas that you have that would further that.
I'd love to talk to you about that, Chief.
I'm more than happy to.
Thank you, Chief.
Great. Thank you, Chief. We'll be back with more, but this was a great introductory conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, Chief Niemeyer, welcome. So Chief Niemeyer is doing very similar presentation conversation with us as we look at, the expectations around future fire stations, the impacts that future fire stations have on budget from a personnel perspective, and the level of service that we have had within our community, hope to have, and would need as we continue to grow. And so I've asked Mark to come to start that conversation with everybody today as well.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council, it's good to see you again. Similar to Chief Lee, I think you're going to see some crossover in our challenges moving forward as far as community response. And that's not surprising from a growth perspective, what we're seeing in our city, in our community, in the Valley from a strictly a growth perspective and some of those challenges. So an overview of community response, just to reiterate our mission, we try and keep it simple because when we get on scene, it's fairly complex, but we are here to protect lives, property, and the environment. That's simply our mission. So when somebody calls 911, those are the three things we're focused on, with lives being the top priority, property being the second, and a very close second is the environment. So Chief Lee's analogy of the hospital is brilliant. I'd love to steal it, but we're not going to. We're going to talk about all hazards, and you'll see this in documentation that we have within the fire department. Really, the question is, what does it mean when we say we are an all hazards fire department? If you look at the first two, those are the bread and butter. Those are the core of any fire department across the country, including ours. It's a fire suppression response, whether that's a residential house fire, a commercial fire. We can talk a little bit about wildland fire, although that's especially down below. And it's also the medical response. Those are the two bread and butters of any fire department. That's what makes up the majority of our responses in the fire department. And as we have community growth, you can imagine that these calls will grow as well, and they correlate together. But then we talk about the all hazards piece, and we talk about fire prevention and education. How do we mitigate and prevent the thing from happening in the first place? And we've done that very well. Smoke detectors are a perfect example. The fire service nationally took an initiative to say we want less fires and we want less people dying in fires. And so we really pushed smoke detectors, and now there's multiple campaigns. Everybody knows what, and hopefully everybody's keeping the batteries in. That's just a little public announcement there to make sure that we're staying safe. But it worked. We reduced the number of fires and reduced the deaths. So that education piece is important. Technical rescue is another aspect of what we do, and we do that because the community demanded it. They kept calling us for services when it comes to rescue. So we have technical rescue, we have hazardous materials, we have wildland or wildland urban interface, we have swift water and dive, we have airport rescue and firefighting. You can see this is all hazards. This is what makes up everything that we do. And so as we talk about growth and the impact of growth, we're going to talk about it within these realms and within that philosophy. This is our simple understanding of the community expectations, and this is over years of just discussing and analyzing and talking to the community. And I think these are pretty reasonable. When they call 911, their first expectation is we get there fast. I've always been amazed at how time plays into emergencies like this. I know when I responded for years and years and years, I felt like we got there pretty quick, and I'd get out of the rig and I'd look at the people that called, and they'd kind of gave me the look like, what took you so long? I'd say, wow, we really got here fast. Until I had to call 911 on a major accident at a major intersection, and I realized that time and how that affects people. And so that get here fast, how do we do that? We properly place our resources. We have fixed asset resources, fire stations and personnel. We work collaboratively in the planning world. We look at growth projections. We bring in several factors to say, where do we need to place a fire station to then allow for us to get to that location fast in that area. They also expect us when we get on scene to solve their problem. If they have a house fire, they want us to put it out. If their loved one is having a heart attack, they want us to treat that loved one the right way. How do we do that? We make sure we have the right training for all of our responders so that when they get on scene, they have the technical expertise to do the job. And then lastly, they expect excellent service. And we believe we do that by being a community partner. We roll the doors up, we allow the community in, we engage the community. So we feel like this is how we meet those three expectations that our community has. We do want to be an outcome-based department, and time is our biggest indicator of outcomes. How quickly we can get there determines how best we can affect an outcome in a positive way. Whether that's a house fire, as I mentioned, a heart attack, a trauma victim, anything we're talking about. And the standard that we measure ourselves against is 90 seconds to get out of the station. So from the time the bells go off in the station till the time we roll out the door, our firefighters have 90 seconds, day or night, to get out of the station. I would challenge you, if you think maybe that's easy, try it at 2 a.m, set your alarm and let it go off and get dressed and get out to your car. And that 90 seconds is pretty quick. I'm happy to say I just saw a report on the national average, and we are doing better than the national average. We're always going to strive to be better, but I'm very pleased at where our performance is right now. And then a travel time is from point A to point B. It's from the station to the call. And several factors here that we can't control. We can't control traffic, and we know by driving around that that's increasing. We can't control road construction that may alter our route from point A to point B, but our goal is a 5-minute travel time for our emergent calls. Those are the calls where outcomes and time really have the biggest benefit. And then as we move forward, we're going to continue to evaluate our performance. We're going to define future outcomes, but our organization will continue to be an outcomes-based organization to meet the community needs. There is some increasing demand, and I thought there's a little bit of explanation to this slide. You can see a drop in call volume from 2017 to 2018. Obviously, I wasn't here, but I was a part of the reason for that. And that was through our EMS system. Under Access, we all got together and said, can we respond better? Do we have to send all these resources to all these calls? And so we made some changes in the dispatch process and in the dispatch protocols to where we didn't send an engine and an ambulance to every single call. We broke that up, and that was part of the board reviewed that and approved that. We actually saw a drop of a little under 0.5%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it certainly keeps resources freed up. And so there was a drop in that year, and then you saw an increase in 2019, increase in 2020. I thought what was interesting is we have a 4.8% annual increase in Northwest Boise, and then a 7.2 annual increase in the Southwest. So those are two areas I know that we're talking about as far as growth. The complexity is really what's increasing. And this first slide in the upper left-hand corner, I want to thank Doug and his crew over at Parks for getting us some of this information. But in 3 years, 2017 to 2020, we've seen a 47% increase in floaters on the river, 121% increase, more time spent on foothills rescues between 2017 and 2020. We have more high-rise hotels and high-rise housing downtown. You've seen that recently in the two videos that we sent out in the Friday memos, where we had narrated by our battalion chiefs, where we had a fire on a high-rise at the top, and we also had a rescue from the top of one of those high-rise. So certainly that's an increase. And then 1,400 plus new residential parcels in the WUI over the last 5 years. Those are some of the complexities that we now face beyond the first two bread and butter bullet points that we talked about earlier. We also have some complexity in other areas. Hazmat, we are the regional hazmat team for our health district region. So that has its own complexity and its own training requirements as far as an hourly training requirement. Airport fire and rescue, talking to Rebecca at the airport, we're almost back to pre-COVID times as far as travel goes and flights in and out. And we're seeing more flights that are direct flights. We're going to see an increase in traffic at the airport. That's potentially an increase in our readiness, what we're doing at the ARF station. We do have the tank farms. That's always a threat in our community. Downtown, located right next to a hospital. Collaboration with law enforcement. This is a good thing, but it has changed for us over the last 10 years. The active shooting environment that we have seen, starting really with Columbine and then moving forward, has forced us as the fire department and paramedics to get more involved in that aspect of the response. It used to be that we would wait for law enforcement to go in, secure the scene. When it was completely secured, we went in, and what we found over these mass shootings and some of the other issues that we have seen nationally is we're losing lives in that time frame. So we now have firefighters and paramedics trained to go in under the protection of law enforcement into a warm zone to help treat victims before that scene is completely safe. That's something new for all of us, but it's something demanded based on what we have seen nationally in the research. And then we also have the incident management team that responds there certainly within our city when we see flooding and other issues and events, but they are also called upon every now and then from our partnering agencies as disasters go beyond our borders. So what do we look like, or what do we want our future to look like? Our recommendation is that we maintain our current levels of service. And as the community expands and grows, so do we, to maintain that level of service. The other two options we don't suggest, certainly decreasing service levels is not something we suggest. And also right now, adding new services is something we just don't feel like we have the capacity to do. So if we tried to add a new service right now today, what would have to give in order to be able to do that? So we strongly support that we maintain our current levels of service as the community grows. And how do we get there? Community engagement, mayor and council engagement like this, our firefighter and our employee engagement, the boots on the ground, asking them what works and what's not working. Other city department engagement, we see a lot of partnership and collaboration coming as we continue to define and then offer that level of service. And then also our partnership. I mentioned access earlier. That's a good example of where we would engage with our partners to ensure master plans and station locations are done in a productive and thoughtful way. So if we apply that current level of service to the future growth based on the growth numbers that we have seen, what potentially do we need moving forward? And what we're talking about, and something that I certainly walked into that we've had good discussions about and is actively being worked on, is the new station in the Northwest. Potentially 1 to 2 new stations in the Southwest, a ladder truck also for the Southwest based on some of the growth that we're hearing about and seeing in that Southwest area. We're seeing rising calls for EMS in the downtown core. How do we augment that so we can keep our critical resources, our truck and our engine in service and available for the responses they need to go on? Working with Chief Gervais and the fire inspectors, certainly our inspections are on the rise and our ability to keep up isn't. So potential there. And then also personnel and capital resources to manage the increasing call volume in the recreational areas. The river I mentioned earlier, the foothills rescues. How do we continue to get to those calls in a timely manner that the people expect and still manage the growth of the day-to-day bread and butter calls? And with that, hopefully I stayed at the 10 minutes, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Mayor. Two questions for you, Chief, or sorry, two questions. The first is if you could help clarify what the 5-minute response time actually means. There's so much confusion about that. And I don't think it means every call is responded to in 5 minutes, nor do I think it means our fire department is failing if a particular call takes more than 5 minutes to get to. So could you just take a second to really clearly explain what the objective is and how we measure it?
Yeah, Councilmember Bajan, thank you. Great question. Response times are always a little bit confusing. So that the travel time of 5 minutes is really, we're talking about from the moment we leave the station, so point A, to the moment we arrive at the scene, point B. And as I mentioned, there's so many factors that come into play. If we have great traffic flow, we're going to get there quickly. If we got a lot of traffic, it's going to slow us down. If we have road closures, et cetera, weather, all of that. The goal around 5 minutes is to affect either a cardiac arrest call and the outcome of a cardiac arrest call, B, to affect another trauma call, profuse bleeding, et cetera. And the sooner we get there, the sooner we can stop that. In a house fire, if we can contain that fire to the room where it started, we can prevent further damage to the home. And that 5 minutes is really what we're shooting for. It's a goal. It is not the all standard. So if we get there in 5 minutes and 40 seconds, it doesn't mean we failed, to your point. It means we just got to be more efficient when we get on scene and be a little bit quicker with our actions when we get on scene. So the 5 minutes is a goal. It is not an adopted standard. It's something that we can talk about and discuss. The national goal, if you will, is 4 minutes. I can tell you, I was just on a conference call this morning with the Metro Chiefs. No fire department can meet 4 minutes. That's simply based on a flashover. It cannot be met. I don't believe in having goals that you cannot even come close to achieving. So locally, what goal do we set that makes sense for us? And how can we still affect positively outcomes?
What's a flashover?
Sorry, I got into fire lingo there. So flashover is when you have superheated gases in a room. So this small
and it
room
goes right over
has
you.
a small fire, it heats up and those gases heat up and then you have an ignition on those gases and then it flashes over the room.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And really what we're trying to prevent there is if anybody's in that room or near that room, we can get in there and get them out. If you go back to our mission, it's lives first, right? And then it's property and then it's the environment.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, if I can follow up. I'm following up with a totally unrelated question, which is I have a recollection from this presentation about this time last year that at that time we had so much firefighter overtime that there were men and women who were earning the money, doing the work, but it wasn't an efficient use of money and resources in that if we had potentially hired a few more personnel or allocated the personnel differently, we could cover those needs at a lower hourly rate. And I remember that being something that stuck out to me, that sort of struck me from the presentation. But then it was COVID-19, we had all kinds of other stuff going on. And I wonder if there's been any work from a budgetary and personnel perspective to try to address that problem.
Councilmember Bajan, not yet. And I say not yet because we've recognized the need to have that discussion. What I want to see from the organization is a long-term comprehensive strategy discussion on staffing, not kind of a quick fix, but more of a, what is our comprehensive plan moving forward over the next 10 years to maximize staffing? The conversation is coming internally. For sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Chief, good to see you again. So since Councilmember Thompson is not here tonight, I'll ask his question just to make sure that it does get asked. You talked about maintaining service at the levels that we have today, not necessarily trying to enhance them, certainly not doing worse. Be my understanding that that doesn't mean that we couldn't look, as you talk about these staffing levels and what's the best way to do it at a 4-person engine, at least at Station 5. Is that correct?
Council President Clay, great question. I'll address Councilmember Thompson as well. The 4-person staffing is the how. The why is what we need to have a discussion around first. What are we trying to accomplish? Why are we trying to accomplish that? And then how best do we do that? So for example, Station 5 you alluded to, one of the visions I have is to actually put a QRU, a 2-person QRU at the downtown station, especially to cover quick response unit. Thank you, Mayor. You're going to probably have to do this. For
I really
while.
don't know, which is why I'm asking, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, quick response unit, that could be 1 or 2 person to affect those downtown calls. So we free up our engine, we free up our truck. 4-person staffing could be a discussion around the increase we see in our recreational areas. Do we need more staffing to help affect good outcomes there? So I think 4-person staffing is the how. We really want to get to the why and start with the end in mind and then work our way back and look at all the hows on how to get there.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
And Mayor, thank you, Council President Clay. I was going to make sure that TJ's question got asked as well. And I don't want to beat a dead horse here as far as staffing goes, but you mentioned that there's 3 potential new station, or maybe there was 4. There was 1 in Northwest, and then was there 2 in Southwest?
1 to 2,
1 to
depending
2.
on the rate of growth.
And that is something that you expect to see in the next 10 years. And so with that, how much kind of staffing should we be expecting to kind of a base level be imagining?
Yep. So for a fire station, we hire 12. And that allows for, Councilmember Bajan mentioned overtime, and that balance of overtime versus too much overtime, personnel. Hiring 12 for a fire station allows a little bit of balance there, where you have the 3 that it's required at least initially to staff a fire station, then 1 extra. So it helps balance that out. So 12 per station, so you're looking at 36 there. We're always replacing folks that are retiring. That's ended up being about 12 to 17 to 18 a year. I know that's not new staffing, but it comes into play when you talk about personnel time. So the training division, we're talking about additions to the training division to maintain that level of service, to keep people certified initially and then ongoing. What does that look like? And then the 1 to 2 inspectors that I mentioned. So we're probably at about 40. I'm taking a stab here based on the presentation.
And then, Madam Mayor, just to follow up to that, similar to the question that I asked of Chief Lee, as far as recruitment goes with the folks that are retiring plus new folks that are coming on, do we expect to see some of these larger hiring classes like we've seen in the last couple of years? And do we have the draw, the support, the amount of people applying in the community? My sense is that we do, but I'm not sure if that's the case or not.
Councilmember Halliburton, as far as interest in the fire department, certainly we have interest. So I don't foresee a problem there. The challenge that we have is when you have those large recruitment classes, we're limited to about 18 is what we can put through a recruitment class. The concern I have moving forward is with our retirements and our additions, that's probably 2 recruit classes a year. That's pretty challenging. That's pretty taxing. And the only concern I have there, you're taking then away from the training for all of our existing crews. So how do you balance that? And that's something we're going to be working on within the fire department to answer that.
All right. We've got time for one more.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead. I said we've got time for
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank-
Sorry about that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just actually wanted to commend a couple of staff folks, one from BFD and one from BPD, who have been wonderful about community outreach, and not just within our community, but new members to our community. Those 2 staff members are hosting a meet and greet for Captain Fomby, who has joined BPD to head the Training, Education, and Development Division. And one of those individuals also was instrumental in putting together the teen fire ops training program that we did 2 years ago, Chief. And I just want to point that out, that the individuals that we have in these 2 departments are critical, I think, to the recruitment efforts. Because for anybody who's ever been the new guy or the new woman, the new person, feeling welcome, feeling like somebody's making space for you, I think is critical. And I know that those are more like soft skills, but if you don't feel welcome, if you don't feel like the community has made space for you or that they actually want you, it matters. It matters how deep a connection you make in the community and how well you do your job and if you stay. So I just wanted to do that. I just wanted to thank Alan Slaterock and Casey Hazmat for welcoming Captain Fomby to our community.
Thank you, Council Pro Tem.
Great. Thank you, Chief, very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for catching me on the acronyms. I appreciate that.
Excuse me. All right. So next up, we have Sarah Arkle, Jennifer Tomlinson's here, Doug Holloway as well. It's actually really nice. And thank you, Chief. I don't know if you're slipping out or not. Thanks for being here in person. It was good to see you. Sarah and Jennifer and Doug are here to talk about the Campaign for Nature 30 by 30 pledge. And I just have to say, I'm super excited about this and really grateful to the creativity that came out of this team that's before us today. I put a challenge in front of staff as I was putting a challenge in front of other cities, as well as in front of the administration, to pledge to protect 30% of our natural lands and waters by 2030. And when presented with this challenge, our team responded in incredibly creative ways, and they're here to share with you their ideas today so that we can hopefully make this pledge a reality. And so just super excited for them to be here, but for them and for me to see actually the official presentation as well, to discuss with us their path forward for protecting important places throughout our city and throughout our neighborhoods. So go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That was a wonderful introduction. I was going to try and do the same. So I'm here to introduce to you an initiative that is happening all over the world. It's led by nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and believe it or not, corporations. Based on best available science, we understand we need to preserve and conserve 30% of our land and water over the course of the next, 9 years in order to effectively combat, adapt, and mitigate the effects of climate change. And when the mayor's office reached out to our department, Parks and Rec, asking how we can meaningfully participate in this effort, we had to kind of do an analysis on our own to figure out, how do we operate within the area that we participate in managing, and what are appropriate benchmarks. So the map on the right, Jennifer Tomlinson's team put together for us to kind of help us quantify how we currently, what our baseline acreage is, right? So that includes the interagency foothills management area as well as our city limits. And those qualifying lands are open space properties that would provide ecosystem benefits, right? Places where we don't have improved park sites necessarily, but we have riparian habitat or unimproved kind of wild places. So currently the city of Boise owns about 22% within that management area, which is shockingly high considering how we're talking about, almost 100,000 acres. However, looking at owning 30% of that property became sort of not really a good feasible benchmark for the city. So we had to dig deep and look at what might be some more meaningful goals that are community oriented and that are actionable and attainable. And so that's what I'm going to kind of present to you this afternoon, is what those Boise unique goals might be. And they are presented in no particular order of priority. And I look forward to your feedback. So our first goal, I'm sorry, I need to get to my notes here, is to manage 30% of open space and native habitat by 2030 so that we can have resilient ecosystems in the Boise foothills and along the Boise River. So what we mean by manage, so that might include invasive species management actions, actual restoration projects that might take multiple years to be considered successful. It might mean doing science on our properties so that we better understand how to manage them. Right now, between the foothills and that riparian corridor along the river, we own about 6,200 acres, and we are actively managing 15% of those properties. So we have an opportunity to do some increase in habitat management. We'd also like to increase our management of native habitat areas within improved park sites. So this would be outside of the corridor, outside of the foothills, in our actual neighborhood parks and regional parks. We're currently managing about 13% of those native habitat areas. And you can think about that as a pollinator garden or a native habitat area or an open space area that's not, green lawn within a park site. We'd like to raise a total of 30 million to protect open space and clean water resources. Mayor and council, you have a long legacy of raising funds with citizen involvement for open space and clean water. 2001 levy, 2015 levy, we've already raised $20 million to protect these resources and enhance them. And so this goal would be continuing that legacy. We'd like to grow our volunteer opportunities. Most of our habitat improvement activities where we're planting plants or managing invasive species, a lot of that we really rely on our volunteers. And so we'd like to grow our volunteer pool by 30%, make sure that our community members are getting meaningful opportunities to engage in what has been shown to be activities that improve well-being and mental restoration in addition to habitat restoration. And finally, we think the City of Trees Challenge really dovetails nicely into this initiative. In speaking with the staff members who are actively involved in this effort, we are seeking to improve and increase the tree canopy in Boise so that we have coverage of 30%. We're at about 16% right now. And I know this spring, our team will be handing out trees to neighborhoods that have a low tree cover. So we thought this aligned very nicely with the goals of that global 30 by 30 initiative. And I think as we move forward, we'll be looking for other opportunities to sort of align the efforts that the city's partaking to combat climate change and protect natural resources, clean water, open spaces, and incorporate that into the outreach around 30 by 30, excuse me. To that end, we've been working with Public Works. I commend them on their work with the climate action roadmap. Parks and Recreation has been working very, very well with Public Works to try and make sure that, you know, the work that we're doing kind of gets rolled into those efforts. And so we have made sure that this 30 by 30 initiative has been embedded as a climate action initiative. So,
And we'll see that, I think it's the first meeting in May, the climate action roadmap staff will be in front of us to deliver that.
wonderful. So I kind of ran through that pretty quickly, understanding that I know you have other items on the agenda. I'm happy to answer any questions. And obviously Doug and JT can answer any specific questions as it relates to their involvement, but
Thank you.
those are our proposed goals.
Madam Mayor?
Yep, we've got some questions for you. Go ahead.
One, more of an observation. First, I think it's fantastic. Second, 30% is a lot, but as you said, we can't own it. And we can't, buy our way into it. As we think about how to achieve these goals, one way might be by securing the agreement of private property owners to assist us in the goal. And that actually, from my perspective, is better. Part of our duty is to manage the land that we own with taxes in mind, frankly. And if 30% of the city of Boise was untaxed, that would be a problem for the other 60% who are paying the taxes. But if we can get agreements from private property owners to manage their land in a way that meets these goals, that would, in my mind, certainly count towards the goal. And it'd be an excellent way to use the property we have for all of the reasons we use property while still hitting the goals. So I just wanted to put that out there as a way of meeting these goals. And I really look forward to watching our progress towards them.
Thank you, Councilmember Bajan.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Madam Mayor.
I think all
It was you. Oh, Council Member Woodings, and then Halliburton, and then Clegg. All right.
Thank you, Sarah. It seems like a very exciting project with some really lofty goals. One of those goals that feels very lofty to me is doubling our tree cover by 2030. How are we going to do that? And how many trees is that? Do we have any idea of what that's going to look like?
Madam Mayor,
Yeah,
I know-
if you want.
yes, I would defer to Council President Clegg on this question.
Sure.
I think I can answer that. A tree for every household, which is 100,000 trees. Right now, we're at 16% canopy cover, as Sarah mentioned, and the GIS system that we put in place shows us that if we are successful in adding 100,000 trees, we'd actually be at 32%. And that, doesn't account for some loss, which will happen. So it is a little iffy, but the goal seems to be right on track.
Thank you. That's really helpful to a numbers person like me.
Okay. Yep, go ahead. Unless, Holly, do you have any follow-up, other questions you wanted to ask?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I was going to let Council President Clegg just keep rolling with that one. My question again is sort of related to Councilmember Bajens, and just how are we evaluating what open space is? Are we including farmland? Are we including, these types of things as well that aren't just along the Boise River and the foothills, but in different parts of town, whether that be South Boise and some of our open space out there? I'm just kind of curious on the definition.
And then also just to tack onto that, given your interest, and of course ours, is where canal easements and pathways would fit into this.
So these are great questions, Madam Mayor, council members. The initiative came with sort of a definition of what qualifying lands are. And so Sarah Sundquist, our GIS specialist, took kind of that definition, which includes areas that could provide, I think the best way I can describe this is areas that could provide an ecosystem value. So if it's going to be an improved or maintained right-of-way that's regularly mowed for access, it's probably not going to change, right? It's utility, and it would not really qualify as an open space area. The whole point of this effort is to try and preserve those natural amenities that human populations rely on, so that we can have clean drinking water resources, appropriate soil retention so we can grow food and have topsoil. But it doesn't include ag lands. It doesn't include improved park sites. It would only include those areas that can serve an ecological function.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification, Madam Mayor. Just a quick follow-up. I think that you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of council members who are eager to participate and help out wherever they can. So thank you for bringing this forward, and definitely let me know how I can jump in. I probably have more questions than could be asked in a work session, but they come from a positive place of wanting to be involved. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to meet at another time and chat about it if you'd like, Councilmember Halliburton.
Well, and just before the council president jumps in, I'd say that since some of these areas that we're working so hard to secure in neighborhoods throughout the city don't qualify, then, we can tell ourselves that in some ways they do, and then we'll be doing even more than, we set out to do. Because while it's not a natural piece, like making sure, I think it's important to you, it's important to so many of us, that we set aside access, open spaces, and just in the 10-minute walk conversation we had with regard to parks in neighborhoods throughout the city, that this doesn't become a foothill-centric proposal is really important. So what we do that by achieving and looking at natural areas within existing parks, or when we get a new park site, like making sure that some of it remains natural. So there's ways that we can make sure that this is a citywide, like the city as a whole benefits from a geographic perspective as well as a resilience perspective.
And Madam Mayor, I'll just point out that the master plan for Spalding Ranch includes an area that has, native habitat and a riparian corridor along a canal. But because those can serve some ecological benefit, they could potentially be qualifying lands.
Thank you. So that actually touches on one of my questions, which was, especially if we're successful in raising more money, are we beginning to look in other areas of the city beyond the foothills for those little pieces of land? And will they count toward this? It sounds like that's true, and they will. Is that?
Madam
Okay.
Mayor, Council President Clegg, that's correct.
Okay.
Critical open space and the use of critical open space could qualify again if we're offering these ecosystem benefits.
Yeah. And then kind of tagging on to Councilmember Bajent's comment earlier, I think south of the city, still within our area of impact, and actually in the airport area within city limits, in many cases, there's an awful lot of land that has a potential, especially along some of the old creeks, to be managed for open space, as are the areas in the foothills that we're not managing today, but have those traditional creek beds that could be restored. So I'm hoping that will also be a part of this effort. Sounds like certainly a perfect opportunity to kind of energize that as well.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, I would agree.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
thank you. That was a great presentation, Sarah. Thank you. Will we have an opportunity for the public to be a part of this, whether it's helping to identify maybe property that they have or that they either that they own or that they're aware of in their part of Boise?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez. Yes, at the heart of this is really community involvement, whether it's on properties that we own or partnerships that we might be able to leverage. I know Ada County Soil and Water Conservation District has a pollinator project, which we are partnering with them to improve outreach. We're still at the kind of beginning stages of this effort, obviously introducing it to you today. And we look forward to including our community in trying to achieve sort of small but big impact. So any opportunities that you know about that we can tag on to, we'd love to learn about it.
I think it's been clear, especially over the last few years, that our community wants to be involved in these big initiatives. And so I think it'd be great if we made sure to let them know that they're welcome to be a part of this at this early stage. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Anything else? I think, oh, Councilmember Whittings.
Yeah, I just had Lisa's question reminded me of something that could be interesting for this too. I was chatting with someone from the Land Trust last weekend, and they're kind of putting more focus on farmland preservation. If we had a resident who wanted to preserve some farmland in some way, would that then count toward this 30% too? I guess it kind of intersects with Councilmember Bajent's comments earlier also.
Yeah, Councilmember Whittings. Unfortunately, agricultural lands do not qualify under this initiative. I suppose we can decide as a community that they're important enough to us to have them be a qualifying land. But I think that for the purposes of this 30 by 30 initiative, it really was getting back to some of those core ecological services that they can provide. So if we have a piece of ag property that's really looking at a clean water project as part of what they're doing, I think you could argue that would qualify here.
And I think that brings up a good point, because a lot of the ways that we're able to keep farmland and ranchland productive is by offering easements, paid easements for things like habitat restoration, if there's an appropriate type of habitat on that land. So I feel like there could be something there that could dovetail really nicely, because I think that farmland preservation has become a really hot topic and a really big focus for many in our community for a variety of reasons. A, we need to feed ourselves somehow. B, it really, it does cool our city in a lot of ways to have some of those open spaces, even when they're productive. So I would be interested in having that part as a part of the conversation and seeing if there's a good dovetail there.
Great. All right, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for the great conversation and suggestions. And with that, we'll recess until 6 o'clock.
All right.